Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Alright, I might have misnamed this part of the chapter, the progressive era. I call it Reforming the Workplace, which it kind of does, but this is more of a chapter or more of a section of the chapter in which we're going to be covering those muck rakers, right? Those rakers of muck. Don't put that down as the answer on your test because, I want to make sure you did your work, and I put that as an answer. So if you're like, a muck raker must rake the muck, you'd be wrong. So presidents like the three that we had just discussed, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, they tried to help progress America, try to move things forward, control the corporations, help consumers, control the banks, make sure that things are being done honestly. And it wasn't only the government or Congress, the president or police, working in the cities. They're not the only ones who are trying to bring reform to the United States. Journalists were also trying to help reform or right the wrongs in America. We call them muckrakers. And these muckrakers, they take up the call to help. They are a brave group of journalists, reporters. Thomas Nast was a cartoonist. Jacob Reese was a photographer. These journalists that expose the bad, the evil, the corrupt, the injustices that were so bad in the cities and across America that I wrote here, it was so grave that it made the blood of the average American run cold. It was. There was a lot of bad things going on for Americans that stemmed from the Gilded Age. Unless you were a Carnegie or a Rockefeller or you were a Ford or somebody like that, a Vanderbilt, you were probably poor in the United States, especially if you're an immigrant and moving into the cities. It's these muckrakers that do things to help you out. First one we're going to cover right here is we're going to cover Lincoln Steffens. He was launching attacks against urbanization and political machines. He was really hammering down on Boss Tweed. Remember, so did Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a cartoonist, drew cartoons. Steffens, he launched his at a magazine. And after Steffens was hammering down on Boss Tweed, Ida Tarbell stepped up and she started writing against none other than John D. Rockefeller and what she calls, and this is that McClure's magazine, that's where Steffens worked at, this series called The History of the Standard Oil Company. And during these stories, she outlines and documented the cutthroat business practices that John D. Rockefeller had help him towards his meteoric rise. Remember, Rockefeller uses the horizontal integration of businesses, which means that he went into the oil refining business and he gobbled up all of his competition. He created a monopoly. He would underprice or undercut his competition so then they couldn't survive lowering their prices, and then he would buy them out of competition. Or he would just go in there and purchase the businesses, or he would just make these other businesses, he would lower his price so cheap that other businesses couldn't even handle it. He just cutthroat. That's what John D. Rockefeller was. And Ida Tarbell might have had a little bit of animosity towards Rockefeller because her father's business was actually one that Rockefeller threw under, which he actually took over. Rockefeller had driven her father out of business. So she was writing against John D. Rockefeller. I mentioned another one, Jacob Reese. He was a photographer. There's one of his pictures right there. It was his drive to expose the horrible living conditions in New York tenement buildings, those dumbbell tenements, in his book, How the Other Half Lives. His photographs are part of a larger reform effort which was undertaken during the Progressive Era that sought to address problems of rapid industrialization and urbanization in the Gilded Age. And these reform efforts actually led to the government regulation and the passing of the 1901 Tenement House Law, which mandated new construction and sanitation regulations that improved the access to air, light, and water in all buildings. Now remember, I've talked about this in class, in the classroom. Jacob Reese's How the Other Half Lives, he would go to these rooms at night usually, and he would knock on the door and people would let him in, and he would like to take pictures. These tenement buildings, you have to remember, they were small. They didn't have a bathroom. If they had a window, it was one window for the whole tenement. They would have air ducts in their buildings, and they would be mostly filled with trash. The escape routes, the escape ladders outside, most likely destroyed. Okay, so they were very unsafe, unhealthy living conditions with so many people sleeping under one roof in this apartment building, especially with no bathroom. You'd have a cesspool at the bottom outside, or you would have a chamber pot which you would go in and dump. So tenement house living with these, especially with the immigrants, because they were the ones really moving into these tenement buildings, jam-packed, disease running through them like wildfire, people are dying left and right. It was very, very unhealthy, and Jacob Reese was one of the people who made that change. He was the guy who said, hey, look, America, this is how the other half lives. These people are poor, miserable lives. So he was able to make changes. The next one we're going to talk about, which you remember I mentioned before during Teddy Roosevelt, was Upton Sinclair and his book called The Jungle. Sinclair hoped to illustrate the horrible effects of capitalism on the workers in the Chicago meatpacking industry. And what it says is this bone-chilling account of the jungle detailed workers sacrificing their fingers and their fingernails by working with acids, losing limbs, catching diseases, toiling long hours in cold, cramped conditions. Some of these stories, I wonder if I put them on here. Let's see on the next page. So here, he helped the public outcry. He hoped that it would be so fierce that the reforms would follow, and I want to go in here to tell you what this was like, because Sinclair also uncovered the contents of the products being sold to the general public. Here we go. Spoiled meat was covered with chemicals to hide the smell. Skin, hair, stomach, ears, nose were ground up and packaged as head cheese. Rats would climb over this meat in the warehouse, leaving piles of excrement or poop behind. And within months, Congress under Teddy Roosevelt passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act to curb these sickening abuses. I mean, remember, these guys work on acid. Oh, your finger melts off. Oh, good, that's going to be the next hamburger you eat because they grind it up. Gross stuff. Upton Sinclair said, I went to hit the public's heart, but instead I hit their stomach, right? Because people were just so grossed out by some of the things that they were reading, that what Upton Sinclair found in his research of the meatpacking industry. So you have a lot of these reformers, these journalists, these muckrakers, people going out there trying to make things better, trying to push the government to do things. Upton Sinclair tried to force them to, fix the sanitation in the meatpacking business. You have Jacob Reese taking these pictures, trying to reform the way people are living in America. So these muckrakers, these journalists, are really trying to fight and help the average American person in the United States to make things better or to progress to better things.